podcast. Hello again, and
Hi, this is Len.
and today we're going to be talking about spirituality, which is, I think, an interesting aspect of bipolar. I speak actually as something of a committed atheist, but I do think in mania we can reach heaven, and in depression we can reach hell.
That is a very true statement, and I think that one of the differences between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is that maybe a bipolar 1 person's mania would reach a certain level of spiritual awareness and kind of like advanced kind of like connection with the cosmos, is where I know a bipolar 2 mania is not as very strong as ours.
Yeah.
But I know that you can still reach certain heights of nirvana, as to put it mildly.
Well, yes, I think for me, my spirituality as someone who is who doesn't believe in a God, I still reach a level of spirituality, especially when I have that mania, where I have love. I have a huge love and affection. Affection isn't even a strong enough word. I have a love for everyone I see, and I see the bonds between people. I see the possibilities that people can reach, and it fills me with absolute joy.
Yeah, I do believe that. I believe that, I feel a certain, the same level of joy and love. But, also, I do want to touch on the fact that, some of it is anger. I was very angry in my last year, my episode 2, where, it was, I was like, these are all the people that should be condemned by God. These are all the evil people.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of all these evil people because they're not God loving. They're and there was a lot of anger and a lot of hate involved in that, which is also another part as well.
Yes, absolutely. But I'm really interested in your spirituality because I know that you feel your spirituality and your religion very, very deeply. And I know you've recently had a very spiritual experience, which I don't think was connected with mania, actually.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't. And what I was trying to do, is what I wrote a little piece. You read it. It was more like, I'm not gonna say it was mania, but I was still scared. I was still questioning it, even though my God, my Lord was speaking through me, and I felt Jesus, I felt the Lord, I felt strongly, and I still I was struggling because I was worried that it would be mania. I kept checking myself. I kept saying, let me make sure I have both my feet in reality, make sure both my feet are planted on the ground, planted on earth, and that I'm not flying too high. But what I felt was absolute oneness with him, and I closed my eyes and I saw stars. Beautiful.
And I find that really interesting because I think it must be difficult for you. Where do you draw the line?
It is because
a genuine feeling of joy and love for your God, and when does that become mania, and when does it become damaging mania?
Well, yeah, that's the point. And I've written about this and I've discussed this many times, because if you put like a bipolar person in ancient times and they had these spiritual movements where they felt God, and they felt there would be either a prophet or an oracle or something like that. But these days, those things don't exist anymore in our modern society.
No. Certainly, and I think there's also a cultural difference between, because obviously you're in the US and I'm in the UK.
Right.
And I think there is a cultural difference, because I think there is a much stronger tradition of how can I put it, what's the word, sort of evangelical Christianity
Mm-hmm.
in the US, and there's a much stronger tradition of people simply going to church on Sunday, which we don't really have here, because the Church of England is basically a religion where you can believe in it but not actually do anything, which I find strange. But
Yeah.
yeah. But I very much I'm fascinated by your spirituality, because it is such a fundamental part of you. And
I think it is for most people, but for someone who, you know,
mm,
sees other things beside that, it's hard to draw the line. It's hard to
yeah,
say.
yeah.
It's hard to say what is real and what is not, and that line is very fine.
Mm, mm.
That
I mean,
line is very
I
fine.
would say that my spirituality, and I think it is informed by my experiences of mania, but and that feeling of joy and connectedness that I get when I'm manic. My feeling of spirituality is, I don't personally believe that we have a life after death, but I believe that we actually live on in the connections we make with people. So I always think in these terms about my grandmother. And my grandmother was a fantastic woman. She had her own mental health issues when she was young, but she passed on so much to her three daughters and her whatever 5 grandchildren, and I think she lives on through us. And I suppose that's my spirituality. It's not a it's not spirituality where I believe that we go somewhere after death, physically or spirit or in terms of a soul. But I think, we pass on a little piece of us to everyone we meet. And I
Yeah,
do but I do think that is kind of informed by mania, because I think when I'm manic, I do have that urge to connect with people.
that's where we're different. I mean,
Yes.
for me, a full manic experience, I can actually just go and do stuff by myself. I can go have dinner by myself, have a glass of wine, go down to the beach, and
Yeah.
have this like full on kind of like spiritual awakening, and not need anyone else.
Mm, mm,
Not needing to not needing to connect, you know, anywhere with anyone. Just having that, you know, God is in me and
mm.
he's showing me this and he's telling me to do this. And and it's funny because you question yourself after a while. You think to yourself, is this just my own mind talking to me, making it up, or
Yeah.
is someone really communicating with me? Is someone trying to reach me? And that's
Mm,
where the line of spirituality it always is so fine because the brain can do all these things and make you see all these things and the realities we create for ourselves, is it
yeah.
due to the higher power in the spiritual plane? Is it another dimension, or it's just our brains just sending us to these far off places where imagination lies? That's why we have all these creations in art, film, and music. It's because these people have these
Yeah.
awakenings and they see these things in their mind and they write them down and they share it with the world you know
Mm. And I suppose for you, where is that kind of inspiration from God, and where is it inspiration from mania?
That's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to figure out. A couple
Yeah.
of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Last week.
I
No,
mean,
last week.
I always think my kind of story in terms of religion is I was born into what you would probably call a Church of England family, in the sense that my parents would say, I think, that they believe in God. Um, but it's again that sort of religion where you don't go to church, you don't sort of actively practice religion. But I went to a Catholic primary school. So I was one of probably 3 or 4 kids out of, I don't know, 30, 35 kids who weren't Catholic. So I had the experience of being in that situation where the majority of my classmates were going up to do their first confession or their confirmation and that sort of thing. And I was sitting on the sidelines. And I think that probably informed my view of religion, because I was excluded from religion at a very young age.
That could be a reason for a lot of why, and the thing is, I didn't feel that kind of exclusion either, but my religious background's a little different. My religious background is a Muslim background, and I think, I personally I rejected it most of my life because I didn't like the way a lot of Muslim men treat women.
Yeah.
And that affected my dating life very young. I didn't date, in my own race or my own religion. I sought out other people because I didn't like the oppression of what my religion stood for. So even now, I still don't consider myself religious. It's just the word itself, just very constricting.
Yes, yeah. But I'm interested. Can I ask you, when did you find Christianity?
Well, it's always been on the sidelines. I think as I got into my 20s and I got the bipolar diagnosis in 2004, and I got into my 20s. I did some research on Jesus, the man, not what the Bible or anything else says.
Yeah.
But mostly just the man, who he was, his ideas, his life. What he did between the birth and him at 30 years old. I tried to find all I could find out on the life of Jesus between the time of the birth and when he came back in his 30s and started saying all this stuff and got crucified and all that. I tried to find out all the stuff in between. I was fascinated by all these places that have like shrines and statues of him. They're prominent in Tibet, in Nepal, in all these places where you wouldn't think that Jesus's word would have gotten out. And it's like, and then I started to branch off into Buddhism, because a lot of what Jesus spoke of, a lot of his messages and words, his law, whatever he believed, was mirrored a lot by Buddhism. A lot of monks, a lot of Buddhists, a lot of people believe in the same ideals that Jesus believed. It's the same thing. It's very similar.
Absolutely. It's a moral. It's a very strong and very positive moral framework.
Yeah.
There's also that.
And he believed in mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. Mindfulness. If you look at how Christian monks worship, it's very, very similar to how Buddhist monks worship.
Yes. The vows you take, abstinence, all of these things. It's all very similar. And I think where I started, when I really became Christian, was this year when I read the New Testament back to front. And it became, and you know what, I have other books. I've had the Book of Mormon, the actual Holy Bible. My sister had a copy, all these things. But I still read from my blue book that I had with me in the hospital, that gave me peace, that I read every morning, at breakfast, and that's what I have, and that's what I keep.
And that's really interesting,
from.
Isn't it? Because bringing it back to bipolar, the practice of reading and contemplating and being mindful and meditating is something that can bring you level.
Yeah.
Keep
I think that
yourself grounded,
and I think this I'm starting to practice mindfulness now that I'm level and that I'm comfortable. And when I find myself, flying and having these really, intense spiritual moments and experiences, I remember to check myself and say, "Hey, are you on the ground? Are
Yeah,
you are you in this reality? Make sure you're in this reality. Check yourself,
yeah,
watch yourself. Is this real? Is it real? Do you feel it?" And then when you close your eyes and you feel it, and you can say, "Ah, this is something. This
yeah.
is this is a moment. And don't
And
waste
that
it, because those moments only come very, very rarely."
and that's really important. It's really strong, isn't it, to be able to say, actually, what I'm feeling is real. Because as people who are bipolar, and obviously there are those differences between one and two, but we both, I think, share that sense of going outside of reality sometimes.
And
Uh,
you know what? And I think going outside of reality
mm.
is one of the gifts that human beings have.
Oh
We the thing, I think, instead of thinking of it as a hindrance and, oh, mental illness, now you need pills. It's not. You can have those experiences. You can go outside of reality. You can go so far out, as far
mm.
out as the brain can go. The only problem is coming back. You can
Well,
go,
yeah.
but can you come back? Can you
I,
come
I
back?
think I think the problem actually is with society, in that we have these manic or spiritual experiences, and society doesn't accept them.
No.
They're seen
No.
as aberrations. They're seen as wrong. They're seen as something that shouldn't be done, and that's why we end up medicated or in hospital. And actually, in a for me, in a perfect world, we would tolerate people who have these experiences, as you say, like people were tolerated many years ago. People were tolerated because they were seen as shamans or as prophets
Yeah.
with a
And I
message.
think, and I've been dancing around this issue, and
Mm,
I wrote in my blog, I wrote a very interesting post on, you know, there was a woman on The View, Joy Behar. She said something a couple of years ago about Christianity,
mm,
about how, you know believing in Christ was like, a dream, like, it was a fantasy,
yeah,
and it should be seen as mental illness. And our vice president, Mr. Mike Pence, made her apologize for that. And I found that a very interesting subject, because, when you walk into a church, a very, like, animated priest, or a very,
yeah,
hyper preacher, but like, "Oh, I feel the power of Jesus. I feel the power of Jesus. Hail Jesus, I feel him in me." And, he'll go on this long rant and wave his hands around. And,
yeah,
why is that not considered mental illness? I'm not saying it's a,
yeah,
disrespect Christianity and disrespect the
yeah.
church and disrespect preachers, but, you walk in, you say, if this was, something else, he would
It
be
has,
considered
it has
mentally ill. It's got to be,
exactly,
where do you draw the line? You know?
exactly. Where do you draw the line? It has all the characteristics of mental illness.
Yeah.
And there's and that's interesting, because over here we don't. There are evangelical churches where we have those sorts of preachers, but in general the established religion is very, very quiet, and it's not animated in that way. um
All these people are good, they're dancing, they're jumping up, singing hallelujah, I feel Jesus in me, hallelujah. That's like multiple personality. You can go ahead and just call it what you want, but that's what it is. And,
well, it's like, yeah,
everybody else who has that kind of feeling, or that kind of, power in them, will be considered mentally ill.
yeah, yeah, speaking in tongues.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I found it very interesting that she was made I mean, I didn't agree with her because I don't think believing in Jesus means you're mentally ill because you believe, like, you feel him in you and you feel the power of Jesus
Yeah.
in you and you're mental. I don't believe that. That's not true. But, she was forced to apologize for that, you know?
And
But
but
it brought up the question, where is the line?
exactly, and it comes down to who decides what is mental illness. And actually, it's effectively the establishment. It's an establishment of psychiatrists who write the DSM, the manual, which categorizes mental illness. And this manual is written by people who have never had a mental illness. And
yeah, they studied it. Yeah.
They've studied it, but they've never actually experienced it. And that's kind of what gets me. I would prefer people who deciding what mental illness is to be people who have actually experienced mental illness themselves. Because then
they would never allow that. They would never. They wouldn't get to go to medical school. They would never allow that.
That's my fantasy,
Yeah. No. But it's messed up that they won't let them do that. They won't let them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, actually, over here, there's an increasing movement of patient involvement. So actually, I mean, I've been telling you about the mental health recovery centre that I go to, and most of the people who work there and help people who are struggling have had some kind of diagnosis themselves. For example, my key worker, as I've told you, my key worker who looks after me and helps me go to these courses and so on, actually has the same diagnosis as me. And it's absolutely brilliant because she understands. She understands absolutely. She gets it. And I've had experiences with psychiatrists. I mean, and touch wood, I've got a great psychiatrist at the moment, but I've had these experiences with psychiatrists who just clearly don't get it. They do not understand mental illness. I mean, I had a session once with a psychiatrist, and it literally, I looked at the clock, it lasted 8 minutes, and he said to me, "Okay, how are you feeling?" And I said, "Well, I'm okay." And that's what people with mental illnesses generally say, because they don't want to put it out there. And he said, "Okay." He asked me a couple more questions. He said, "Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll take you off your medication and get you back into work in a couple of weeks." And I was devastated because I wasn't well. I knew I wasn't well. He just could not pick up on the signals, because he didn't have that understanding, that spiritual understanding.
Well, I tell you, I've been going through psychiatrists for a long time now.
Yeah.
And, the first one really messed me up. I went into his office. I never had mental illness my whole life. I mean, I had a drinking problem, but hey, who doesn't have a drinking problem? Anyway, so I went to him, and I was depressed, and I crying his office. He said, he just slammed down these pills, like, "Here, take this, get out of my," you shooed me, "Get out of my office. You have no patience for me," And when I took those pills, that Lexapro back in 2004, it destroyed my life. Because after that, I became in and out of the system for years. But now I have a really good psychiatrist, and it helps since we're talking about spirituality. It helps that he's a very devout Christian, and he's a Filipino doctor, and he's he's very, very religious. And and I remember having the first conversation with him last year. We spoke about spirituality and mental illness the way we're talking about it now, and he understands. You tell him, "I'm feeling this way and I'm feeling that way," but he can understand because he's Christian. He understands.
This is it. And it's finding the right person. I mean, my counsellor, for example, I don't know because I've never asked her directly, but I would probably take a pretty good guess that she's an atheist. She has the same sense of spirituality as I do, and we've talked about my views of spirituality, and she's very accepting of them. So I think it is about finding someone who you can connect with on a spiritual level.
Yeah. And the same goes for therapists. My therapist for years,
Mm-hmm.
he finds my whole journey with spirituality very fascinating because I talk about, God and Jesus and religion and spirituality, and I talk about losing it, getting out of touch with it, feeling connected with it, feeling disconnected with it. And he helped me on that journey. And you asked me, when did I feel, like I was about Christianity, when did I feel like I was a
Yeah.
Christian? It took years to get to this point because I didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, I feel Christian today. You don't wake up like
So
that.
yeah, yeah. It's a process. Although,
It's
yeah,
and like I said, it took a long time because
yeah,
I'm raised Muslim, my family's Muslim, so my ideas are different, and it just
yeah,
you come to a point in life when you realize what you are, but we talked about this. Even though I feel like I'm Christian, I hardly walk into a church. I can't walk into a church. You know,
mm,
I can't walk into a church. I mean, I did on New Year's, and it was very powerful. What happened on New Year's? I sat in the church all by myself. No one else was there. I mean, one other person was there. He said Happy New Year, and then he left. But I was in there,
yeah,
and I heard him all around me, and I cried. I said I'm
yeah,
sad. I said I'm tired. I'm sad. I don't know what
yeah,
I'm doing. And he says okay. And he said if you want to take a nap right here. Yeah, it was funny. It was just like, it was just me in that whole big church all by myself, and I felt it. You know,
yeah.
but I haven't been able to walk into a church since. So I
Well, I
don't even know
think
what that means.
we've talked about this, haven't we? I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but I think um, one of the things that struck me is having been hospitalised and institutionalised. It must be difficult to go to a church because a church is an institution.
Yeah,
So that has, these not after effects, but has these resonances for you of institutionalization.
yeah.
Yeah.
And as someone who's been institutionalized a lot of times. And
Mm.
I have to say, it's like, it's something that I wanted the mania. It's because I don't believe, as a person who never was told they were mentally ill till all the way up till they were 25,
Yeah.
it's like, I never wanted to take pills. I don't want to take pills. I'm stuck on one pill my whole life because my thyroid disorder. But
Yeah.
and that's another thing, health reasons as to why you become mentally ill. Because if I was taking my Synthroid, my thyroid medication, I probably would have never had that reaction. I never thought, I blame the psychiatrist for giving me the Lexapro, but I wasn't taking my medication health wise, my thyroid medication. So
Right.
that could have been a factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my personal belief for me is that I've always been bipolar.
Yeah, I've
I've
never.
I've always had. I mean, going right back to very very early school days, I always had that anxiety,
Yeah.
which is associated with bipolar 2, and I've never escaped it. I mean, in secondary school, I was the pupil who went to the nurse's office the most, and I used to go to the nurse's office and say I've got stomach ache, and I don't think they believed me. I think they thought that I was trying to wriggle out of lessons or whatever. But actually, the stomach ache was a physical manifestation of my anxiety.
You suffer from anxiety. I don't,
Yeah,
I never had, as bipolar, I never had that anxiety like that. But I know that I never had mania either. I never had any of that either. I never
yeah,
had none of it. It just came later
yeah,
on in life. And I guess that's like with diabetes and the rest of it. It just comes later
yeah.
on in life. You don't even know about it. It just comes.
Mm. Well, look,
Yeah.
we're getting up to the end now. We're getting up to half an hour.
Right.
So I guess to sum up, I suppose spirituality, I think, is very very deeply entwined with being bipolar, actually, and I think a lot of people who have been prophets, as we've said, and shamans and those sort of people have had some kind of bipolar experience, I believe.
I believe it too.
Yeah.
Especially how I'm so deep into my spirituality, and I'm always having to check myself and make sure that this is coming from God. This is not coming from some crazy place in my head, which is hard to make that distinction. It's really hard to make that distinction.
Okay, then. Well, shall we leave it there? Because we're on 8 minutes, and I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I hope it's.
I hope so too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope it's been interesting in some way, and we'll get another one going on another yet to be decided subject quite soon. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Mm-hmm.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.